Let's take a look at the settings menu in your TouchChat app. There are many ways to customize and personalize your TouchChat app to best fit your AAC learners' needs. You will find timestamps for each of the settings in the description under the YouTube video. Click on those to move ahead to the setting you are looking for. Start by going to Menu and then Settings. The first few sections here, I'm going to switch over to my document camera. In your handout, you have the listing of these slides so that you can take some notes and refer back to the steps on where to find them. But I find it helpful to see where we are going. So we're going to start with the settings in TouchChat. So to get to those settings, you're going to be on a screen like this with the vocabulary file, and along the orange bar at the top here, you see menu. And we tap on that and we are going to go into settings. So if you want to follow along on your TouchChat, we're going to kind of go through what these different settings are. First thing you're going to see, and I kind of refer to these little grade subheadings as we go through, as you're going to start scrolling. So the first subheading is profiles. Profiles provide a snapshot of the current settings. So you can have multiple profiles saved on your TouchChat app, and you can switch back and forth between those really easily. So this could be used if you have a bilingual AAC user and you've got maybe a Spanish file and an English file. We could have an English voice saved with our English file and a Spanish voice saved with our Spanish file. If you're an SLP and you're using TouchChat maybe on your own iPad and you're working with multiple students, you could save different profiles and make sure you have the right voice, the button timings saved to their vocabulary file, and you're able to then go in and save the profile, give it a name, and you'll end up with a list that after I have created my different profiles, I am able to come in and select which one, and it would toggle that way for me. So you don't have to then refind your voice settings and that sort of thing every time you open a different vocabulary file for a different student. Setting is going to be navigation settings. Pop back over here. So navigation settings, we have page animation. In here, you could enable this by toggling. When you are then switching pages or selecting a button to go to different pages, it's going to navigate, or it's going to slide and animate it. So what I mean is, I hit that, it slid, it animated to go to that other page. So for some, that can be really distracting. And for others, it might be helpful that they see that it's going to a different page. So that can be toggled on and off. Allow gestures by toggling this on. We'll toggle that on in a minute. We're able to use the iPad gestures to complete a task. Something like a single finger swipe down could clear our screen, or a 3-finger tap on the screen could say, I need help, please. Those kinds of things. And we'll talk more about that later, but it's a great feature and we would want to make sure we allow gestures. You might have noticed that because I have a button timing set, the allow gestures is not allowed. Button click sound, if you needed auditory feedback for your gestures or your selecting of buttons, you're able to toggle that on and then you would get the auditory feedback of a click. Button navigation icons. If you notice on the buttons in TouchChat vocabulary files, there's a little arrow in the corner for some of the buttons. That tells us it's taking us to a new page. And so if I turn that off, you'll notice those little arrows disappear. So I find it helpful for us adult communication partners to have those on. The next one is going to be under page size. So for page size, we can turn the status bar at the top of your iPad screen on and off. If you like being able to see the battery status, whether or not you're connected to Wi-Fi, date and time, you can have that turned on. If you don't need it, or your AAC learner doesn't need it, you can turn that off. If you're utilizing something like a VIA Pro and have a key guard, you would need to turn on this keyguard inset. It creates a margin around the vocabulary file to make sure that that keyguard is going to line up with the vocabulary file you are using. If you have done editing and you want to make sure that you don't have helpers coming in, curious fingers coming in and helping, you can set a menu passcode so that in order to access the menu, you need to enter a password. So if I chose something as simple as 1, 2, 3, 4 and turn on my menu passcode, next time I want to come in here, I'm required to enter that passcode. This is the swiping, and this is a good way to show you that if you entered it incorrectly or you have forgotten it, and I'm going to switch over, you can spell out Saltillo on a keypad. So it is 725845556, and that will override the password so that you can get in and make sure. So evidently I didn't type that correctly, and I'm going to get rid of that so we don't have to keep going back and forth with a menu passcode. But as I mentioned, that's a great way to make sure that they are not getting in there. If that needs to be out of sight, out of mind, coming out of your app and going into the app iOS settings, if we scroll down to TouchChat, and turn off allow editing. When I'm in my TouchChat app and I come out of here, I no longer have menu show up in that, as well as I don't have access to get into the different vocabulary files. So for some learners, that might be a better option. The next subsection that we're going to look at is the speech settings. I'm going to scroll down to speech. This looks at all the different customizations you can make to the speech within your TouchChat app. When you are looking at voice options, this is the current voice that is selected. I can tap on there to then see my list of voices that are available to me. With our most recent update in 2.38, you now have access to all a cappella voices, which has the little red A next to it. They are not all automatically downloaded to save a space in your memory. So you can preview with the speaker, and if you like it, then you would download using the little download icon. You also have access to Almagu voices. Those are custom diverse voices that have the little kind of bird next to them. And then you also have Apple voices, so any iOS voices that are available. If you are using different languages with your students, you are able to come in and choose which languages are available for those different voices. So if I have a Spanish user, I can come in and have the Spanish voices show. And they are going to come in underneath. There we go. And there's your Spanish voices that you could choose from as well. Another option is to use custom voices. The Voice Keeper, you can go in and create an account on their website, and somebody could voice bank and read the messages or the sentences to create a custom voice. And then you'd be able to download that into your TouchChat app. There's also the ability to use Vocal ID and a cappella My Own Voice. The next thing under speech that you are able to control is the rate of speech, how fast it's talking. You can drag it to the left to slow it down, as well as drag it to the right to speed it up. Voice pitch, depending upon the voice you have selected, and just so that I have under my English settings here, an English voice, if I chose to make it a lower pitch or a higher pitch. So that can be kind of nice if you have maybe preteens whose voices are starting to change, you can adjust that. Or say you find a more adult voice and you want to make it higher pitched and make it sound a little younger, you can really customize and play with those. If your student or your child would benefit from having a pause in between words as it's being spoken to kind of slow things down, you can come in and choose a 1, 2, or 3-second pause. So it does insert that pause, like the pause in between each words as it's speaking a sentence. So just kind of playing around with that, if that's helpful. If you have changed the rate, the pitch, and really played around with customizing the voice, and now you're not even certain what that voice was supposed to sound like, you can reset it to default. You can also test out your changes here.
This is a test of the current speech settings.
The final voice or speech setting is where you see phone, FaceTime, voice. This has to do with a feature called telephony. So if you're using an integrated or an unlocked iPad with TouchChat, you're able to have a voice speaking through FaceTime or a phone call on a phone. And you would pick one of these Apple voices that is being sent over the communication with your caller. When you're in telephony, we'll talk more about that tomorrow, the user on this end of the iPad is not hearing that voice. And so just know that that's going to come into play. And one of the other settings we're going to talk about does help with kind of some feedback around that. Just gonna click through to our next section is the speech display bar settings. Speech display bar is this white space at the top of your screen. This is where the words will go when you're formulating a phrase or a sentence. You're able to tap that speech display bar to speak a whole message, as well as utilizing the smart punctuation, inserting a period, question mark, or exclamation point. Those will also speak a whole message. If you're using something that has more like sentence or phrase-based vocabulary and you don't necessarily have the user using this, which is rare, you could technically hide the speech display bar so that it's not up there and you don't have to worry about activating that. But for most of our learners, we're going to want that visible. If you have an unlocked or integrated TouchChat device, allowing copy paste, you would be able to use the message that is in your speech display bar by pressing and holding, and you're able to copy that message and share it to other applications on your iPad, like email or text message, the iOS Notes app, those kinds of things. If you don't need that feature, or I have had individuals that weren't utilizing that and then would kind of get stuck in this pattern of like copying and pasting, you can turn that off. Oops, too far. You would just disable that. Auto capitalization is helpful for working on those literacy skills. It's going to auto capitalize the first letter in the sentence on there for you. Show icons. If you don't want to see the icons on your display here, show icons in the speech display bar, different setting. Courtney's probably chuckling at me. You are able to turn on show the icons in the speech display bar. So if that feedback is helpful for some of your AAC learners, that's great. It is helpful to turn that off when we start working on those literacy skills, because it's not recommended to have that kind of, what do we call it, icon text correspondence going on up there. And if you're using a key guard, it's also not going to line up. Hide the delete button. The X in the corner here is one of your delete buttons. There's also clear keys within your vocabulary files. So if you don't want that one up there, you can hide it. I like to have that on. A tip and trick is if you have somebody who likes to fill up that speech display bar with lots of words and then hit speak, if you press and hold the delete button, it will interrupt it and clear that out. The next thing about the speech display bar is you are able to customize the font for the words up there. You can choose a different font if you like those better. You can change the font size. So by default, I believe it usually comes with like something smaller, like a 20-point font. That's kind of hard to read, as well as a little hard to access. So changing that to something bigger, now we can both see it and access the speech display bar for speaking a little bit easier. You can change the font color and the background color. So if you have vision needs related to your AAC learner, then you could adjust those. You can adjust how many lines of text are going to appear up in the speech display bar. For most, one line is just fine. For some, maybe their sentences are getting longer and we want to see 2 to 3 lines of text up in that speech display bar. Now you notice having a 63-point font with 2 lines of text makes that speech display bar really big and the rest of the buttons a little bit smaller. So just playing around with what you need there. The other thing you're going to notice is that by turning on multiple lines of text, I now lose the ability to show icons in the speech display bar. So we often get that question of, I want to turn that on and I don't see that setting. Why? And it's because we had more than one line of text set for our speech display bar. Single line cursor, if it's helpful to see that kind of computer cursor blinking up in your speech display bar, you can turn that on. The last few settings that we have available here for our speech display bar, the tap action is telling the TouchChat app, what are you going to do when I tap on the speech display bar? I can have it just speak, I can have it speak and enlarge text, or I can have it do no action. I'll show you what this speak and enlarge text. If I said,
I want to watch music videos.
When I speak this,
I want to watch music videos.
It's going to speak and enlarge it to the whole screen. This could be helpful if you are working on those literacy skills, kind of isolating that whole message and see it on the screen. It's also great if you're in a really loud environment or a really quiet environment. That way you're able to, as a communication partner, see the message as well as trying to hear it. So that can be a setting that you turn on. For today, I'm going to turn it back to just speaking. Another great feature for feedback and for literacy is this highlight spoken word. You're able to go in and select a color to have used up in that speech display bar to highlight the text. So if I demonstrate again.
I don't want to drink lemonade.
As it was entering those words, it highlighted when I speak the whole message.
I don't want to drink lemonade.
It highlights as it's being spoken. So again, we're drawing attention to the words as they're being spoken, and you can choose the color that you want that to be. I mentioned earlier that telephony feature where you can connect with FaceTime, and as it's speaking to your listener, we are not hearing it on our end, but the listener can hear it. And so in order for us to know where it's at when I'm speaking a message, and if it's done speaking, I can then choose to have it highlight the word, and maybe I wanted a different color, but that way, as I'm speaking through my telephony or FaceTime, I'm seeing the words being highlighted and know when they're done. Oh, thank you. So we will crank up that bad boy. Normally it's shouting, so I apologize if you're not hearing him speak. So let's try that. All right. Next setting that you see here is for that expanded speech area. So if you noticed when I did the speak and expand, it had a blue background with black font color. So you can adjust the size, the font, and the color and background color if you're using that expanded speech area for the speak and expand. Our next setting that we are going to look at is for the speaking settings. In here, we have the ability to toggle on and off speak characters. So what that's going to do is speak the letter names on the keyboard. So if that's helpful for any of your AAC learners to hear this letter name, on the keyboard, you would want to have speak characters turned on. If they don't need that anymore, or if we're not really using that, you can toggle this off. And then it wouldn't speak every letter on the keyboard, it'll wait. Next, we have speak words. And so that is going to speak every word. If you notice, as I'm pressing buttons, it's speaking each word. As somebody's learning to use AAC, having that auditory feedback of what word I'm hitting is really helpful. I worked, as we mentioned at the beginning, with adolescents and young adults who were getting to a phase in their AAC journey where they didn't want everybody hearing each of the words that they were selecting before they spoke their whole message. They were having people predict and guess and not letting them finish their thoughts. And so we can toggle off speak every word. So that way it waits until you are ready to speak that whole sentence before it speaks. And then finally, speak your sentences. You would be able to turn off that as well. The next speak setting is this auto clear. You have 3 options for auto clear. Turning auto clear off, you would have to use either the delete button or the clear button in your vocabulary file to clear that out as you go. The next option is immediate auto clear. That would be, I'm going to say my message.
I don't want to drink lemonade.
And it automatically cleared it right away so that nothing is up there. I can start my next message. That can be great for if you have those who, again, like to fill up that speech display bar and then you kind of hit speak and ramble on and on. However, if we didn't hear them, I don't have the ability to repeat quickly, or as a communication partner to look at that speech display bar to catch what it was that they maybe said that I missed. So pros and cons. The other clear setting is after next activation. If I turn that on and I do something like,
I gotta go.
I gotta go.
I gotta go.
It's gonna stay up there
Good night.
until I select my next button. So that way, if I needed to repeat myself,
Good night.
I could. It's going to stay up there until I'm ready
I feel
to say something else.
frustrated.
So that is after next activation. The next setting that you see on the screen is data logging. So there is the ability to track what buttons are being hit, what time of day, that sort of thing by turning on enable logging. So you'll see a little chart come up in the speech display bar to let you know that that's been turned on. We do recommend setting this privacy password because it is collecting information on here about the use of the device. That's it, nothing else. But if you have personal information or health related information in your file, we want to make sure that that has a privacy password so not everybody accesses it. Once it's on, now the entire time that that's turned on, any buttons I hit are going to be recorded. You are able to upload that as a text file, and there's instructions on our website that will show you where to go to get that information, and you could just read it. It is raw text, so you're going to just see a lot of words on the page. If you would like something a little bit easier and something to help analyze that information, Realize Language is an online service that you can use. There is a free trial, and then you can purchase a subscription. And Courtney can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe right now it's $9.99 a year. And you would set up an account if you, yay, I remembered correctly, Courtney. As an SLP, you can set up an account and have multiple kids saving to that. And what it's going to do is going to give you a word cloud. So if you've used those, the more they use the word, the bigger it is. It breaks it down to parts of speech. It's showing different times of day. So for goal setting and kind of as communication partners to be like, oh, you know what? I notice we do a lot with the device between 9 and 10 because, hey, that's, during morning meeting. But then from like 10 to 2, we're not, we're a little more spaced out. What kind of an activity could we be using the device for? Thank you, Courtney, for that information in there. So it's a great tool to be utilized for gathering that information and helping guide your implementation with your AAC users. Our next setting is going to be the buttons. You are able to do quite a few different things with the buttons in the settings. So one of them is activate on release. So this is helpful if you have a student or a client that tends to accidentally select buttons due to motor control, or they rest their hand on the screen. I have seen individuals who will drag their hand or their finger to get to a button. So activate on release doesn't actually select the button until you pull away from the screen. So it activates on that release. So that can be super helpful to work on with your AAC users. The next one is, I'm going to turn that off for a second, is a dwell time. Dwell time is how long we press and hold the button for. So again, if we have some motor concerns, I've noticed some that just are like really quick to aim for the screen and maybe accidentally hit the wrong button. And so even just setting a slight dwell time of 0.1 or 0.2 of a second is enough to like slow them down just a little bit and be more accurate in selecting their buttons. That could really help with making sure we're aiming high enough with an amount of vocabulary available to them on the screen versus making bigger buttons. And then the last one here is release time. This is a setting that is helpful to prevent those double button presses. So if you have somebody who like double taps, what it does is it will make the screen dead for X amount of seconds or points of a second, parts of a second. So that way they have to kind of wait. So they're not hitting the same button over and over or accidentally. I did have someone with kind of just, that was their natural was to just kind of tap, tap to select the button. And so utilizing release time was helpful for them. The next one on your settings is the force font size. So when this is off, it adjusts the font so that the whole label of a button is visible. If I were to turn that on, it's going to force it to be the same font. And it's not as noticeable on this kind of a layout, but on smaller buttons that you'd start to see abbreviations of words so that we wouldn't be seeing the whole thing. So I personally prefer that turned off, but that's, again, depending upon what your need is. Is there any possible way to create an AAC structured schedule? Good question, Malik. We'll try to address that one towards the end. The next setting is highlight touch. So that if you've noticed with this turned on, I get a little bit of a color change when I'm pressing that button.
So where?
So it's highlighting the button that I'm touching. So if somebody needed that visual feedback, that you are able to do with highlight touch. Gradient fill is, if I turn this on, I can get this gradient fill of the color on those buttons. So those buttons that have a different color, and then I would select how much of a gradient it is, really minimal or very light to dark. Hide all icons. If you are in a vocabulary file and say you don't need the images, those symbols on the buttons, I can turn this on and it will hide all the icons on the buttons. And now I strictly have text. So if you have somebody who's not using the symbols, doesn't need them, you can use any of the files and turn off those icons and now it's text. Show hidden buttons. If you have pages where you have hidden some buttons and you are just wanting to be able to go back to having all the buttons available, you can turn this on so that all of them are in there. Now know that if I turn that on and now I want to go in and when I'm editing, and we'll show you how to do that, and I want to hide some buttons, when I come out of my edit mode, they're going to be visible because show all the hidden buttons is turned on. So if that's a concern you are seeing, check that setting. The next setting is show grid. Right now, I have buttons on every page. I can have a grid show between those buttons. On new pages that I create, if I don't have all my buttons yet, it'll show grid lines so that you can see where those buttons are supposed to be. One caution is if you're using any visual scenes within a vocabulary file, those grid lines will show up on your visual scene. So if you don't want them to be visible for that, you'd want to turn off show your grid lines. Dynamic grammar labels are used in our core word vocabulary files, and I'm going to demonstrate by going over to one of those files. So I'm going to choose a new vocabulary file just to show what it looks like for you. So we were in multi-chat 15. I'm going to go into Word Power 42 Basic for this to show you. So I'm going to go back into my settings. With that dynamic grammar labels, if I'm using word endings, I am able, it's too far, and to have either,
Finish.
if I turn that on, I'm going to see the word that would be created with those word endings that I could say.
Finished. Like.
Or if I turn that back off, I'll leave that visible so you can see what happens. Then I'm going to just see the word ending. So we'd be working on the ability to know that I add ing or I add ed. So again, depending upon your needs for your user, you can turn that on and off. For literacy skills, I do recommend having those word endings because we're talking about how we change our words to change the meaning. And so that really does help with that. The last setting for buttons is the button margin. What this does, if you notice, I have some space in between each of those buttons. By default, technically, I have no spaces. So if it is helpful for your AAC user to have a little bit of a buffer in between each of those buttons, adding that button margin is really nice to have. If they don't need it, you can turn that off and not have that on. Head on over and we will talk more about what Whiteboard is. But just know in the settings, there is a feature in our files where there's a whiteboard that you can draw on the screen with your finger. There are some settings you can control. You can disable drawing in split view. So again, if you have an unlocked or an integrated iPad with TouchChat, you can have split screen where I have TouchChat open on part of the screen and something else open. Maybe I'm looking at an academic thing and I have that on the other side of the screen. If you want to disable the whiteboard because it'll get distorted while you're in that split view, you can toggle that on. If you want to scale the drawing in split view, then you would toggle that so that it stays to scale. If you wanted to be able to reload the last drawing that was in your whiteboard, you are able to do that, as well as autosave any drawings that you use in Whiteboard. Many of you are not going to be seeing the next subheading where it says head tracking. We do have head tracking capability on an iPad Pro or an iPhone X and above, I believe. What that is if I enable that, I'm able to use an alternative access mode of tracking my whole face on the screen. And I can either hover over a button for 1 second, or I can change the hover time. I could blink to select the button, open my mouth, any of those trigger actions to be able to access the buttons on there if I'm not able to use my finger. So if you don't have a device, an iPad that has that capability, you're not going to see head tracking as an option. So don't panic if you don't see that. That's why you don't see it. Social networking. So again, if it's unlocked or integrated, I am able to allow social networking, meaning when I'm making a message here in the speech display bar, not only will I see that copy and share that, or copy and paste that I was doing earlier, but I have the ability to share. And I can share out to certain apps on my iPad, including things like Twitter and Facebook. So if somebody is creating a message in here and wants to share it out that way. I am connected, like I said, it's a VIA Pro, so it's a dedicated device with the iPad Pro here. And so it's connected to a Bluetooth amplifier, and this is where I'm able to do that connection. And then finally, I have a scanning ability within TouchChat. So I can do switch scanning. I can configure, if I'm using something like a TouchChat Express or a VIA Pro, I have ports that I can plug in switches. I can also use our Bluetooth arrow switch to connect to TouchChat, and I can use up to 2 switches and select how I want them. One's going to be my activator, one's going to be my selector, and then I can go through and select those different settings for scanning. You can find more training and support options for your TouchChat app at the touchchatapp.com website under Learning Center. You can also find classes to further your AAC knowledge at aaclearningjourney.com.